Okay, let's talk about doing set operations in MySQL. Now, in SQL and different flavors of SQL, there are three different types of set operators that are supported. MySQL actually only supports one of them. So the three of them are union, intersect, and minus. So on all of them, we're going to create a temporary table by combining data from a couple of different tables or maybe a couple of different instances of one table. We'll look at a couple examples here in a minute. So a union takes and basically just attaches them together. Let me show you what I mean by that. So let's say we're using our world database, and in our world database, we have a city table, which has the name of the city and the country code of the city. In the country, we have the name of the country and the code for the country. Now, let's say I wanted to create a temporary table that listed every code and every name that's in our database. So all of our cities and all of our countries. So here's how we would do that. We would do select code and name from country, and then we'll do a union to tie that together, and we'll select code and name from city. And so what that should do is that will give us, whoops, not code, it's country code. There we go. In our city table, it's country code, not code. So that'll give us the code and the name for all of our countries, and that's what we see here. And as we scroll down past all of our countries, we'll get to the end of our countries here. And then we start over, and now we have the code and name for all of our cities. And so this basically combines these into one temporary table. That's a union. So we basically create two queries and we say combine the output. Now, MySQL actually, it's only supposed to, you should only use a set operator if you're dealing with similar types of data. So the idea is we list it out and then we could use this for something else, right? It's temporary table. We could run other queries against it. That's kind of the idea of the union operator. Now, it does allow you to put in disparate types of information. It shouldn't, but it does. For example, let's put our surface area, well, these are both numbers. Let's pick a couple of different types of things. So let's do our government form, and let's also include the population. So our government form is a character value, and our population is an integer value. So I'm going to include from my country the government form, and from this city our population. And we'll execute. So here's our government form, and when we get down past all of the countries and we get to the cities, you'll see it's now reporting our population. But notice it's still under the heading government form. So if I was going to create a view or something with this, which is something we'll do sometimes, create a temporary table based on a union, use it as a view, and I select the government form from Amsterdam, it's going to tell me 731,200. So when you're doing set operators, remember you really want to keep it so that you're using the same type of data in all of your columns. It doesn't have to be exactly a match, right? So we have code and country code, our column names are the same, but we really want the same type of data. Otherwise, it gets a little chaotic. Okay, let's take a look at maybe another way that we could use this set operator, this union operator. So I'm going to take a look at my ER diagram, and I want to get the code and the name. Let's do code, name, region, and population for every country that's in Western Africa or Northern Africa. Now I could do this with a where clause and an or operator, right? Where region equals North Africa or or Western Africa. I can also do this with a union operator. So let me show you what this would look like. I want to select code. Let's see what I say. We want code, name, and population. Oh, and then we wanted region too. I want to go ahead and see the region because I want to see how this looks. Region and population from country where region equals Northern Africa. Now let's go ahead and just run that as an individual query, and we'll see that that gives us exactly what we're looking for. Now let's say I wanted to include Western Africa as well. Couldn't think of which one I wanted. So I can do a union, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this query right here. And I'm going to turn this from Northern Africa to Western Africa. And I know all of my data is going to line up because I'm pulling the same data. And so here it is. Here's our code and our name and our region and our population from here up is Northern Africa and here down is Western Africa. Now I could have done this with an OR. I also could do this with multiple, or I could add on other unions and add on other regions, just like I could have add on other ORs in my region code and add on other region. But this is another way of doing it. We are combining data using that union. And we've seen some of the strengths and weaknesses of the union operator, right? Because it lets us pull different types of data from the same or different tables. That can be both a plus and a negative. All right, now that's a union. Union takes and combines the results of this query with the results of this query. And that's probably the easiest way to think about it. I do a union and I just combine results of one query with the results of another query. Now, one thing to be aware of, let me do surface area here. If you try to do different numbers of columns, it will error out. And here's your code. The select statements have different number of columns. So you take that back off and it will work just fine. So that's really kind of the only thing that will keep a union operator from working. Now let's say I want to add a little bit more to this. I want to make this a little bit more complicated of a query. And I also want to add the name and population from the city table. So the population of the capital. So I want from country, and I'm going to call that C, and from city as T. All right, so my code is going to be fine, but my name will show in both. So I'm going to specify that I want the name from the country table. And for the population, since it appears in both, this is going to be population from the country table. This is going to be name from the city table and population from the city table. And then I want to add another and C dot capital equals T dot ID. And if you remember from some of our other examples, this right here is the join between, or not, it's not a join, but we can do a temporary relationship between the city ID and the capital, which is an integer which relates back to the city. Okay, so this works now. This query is now different from this one. It has a different number of select statements. There are a different number of, get that right, columns in my select statement. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste that again and change this to Western Africa. And now when I execute, it's going to give me an error. Region where? Western Africa and ha. I had a quotation mark there where it didn't belong. Okay, there we go. So now we have our country code, our name, our region, our country population, our capital, and our capital population. And so you see we can get relatively large queries. This isn't actually a large query, but you can see we can get more complex queries, and the union will work as long as the number of columns is the same. Okay, now that's the union operator. MySQL does not support the other two. The other two operators are the intersect and the minus. So a union just takes everything from query 1 and then adds everything from query 2 and gives you the outputs. An intersect is going to give you everything from query 1, that matches everything from query 2. So if there were countries that appeared in Northern Africa and in Western Africa, they would show up. So that's what the intersect does. Everything that matches in the first query, or everything in the first query that matches the second query will show up. In the minus operator, it's everything in the first query that does not appear in the second query. And that's what the minus operator does. Now, you'd think that there would be some ways that we could really use some of those intersects and minuses. However, I'm going to go ahead and replace union here with intersect. And you'll see that it says, yep, I don't know what that is. And if we place that with minus, yep, MySQL doesn't know what that is. So some of those are supported in other versions of SQL, like Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server. In SQL Server, it's not actually the minus, it's the except operator, but it does the same thing. Okay, so if you're trying to do something like that and you're wanting to do something like one of those joins and you're using MySQL and you can't, you can accomplish the same thing with a subquery. And so with a subquery, you can use, and we have another video on subqueries that you can look at, and you can use the in or the not in operator with your subquery to accomplish basically the same task. So we really don't need those, although they can kind of be useful from time to time. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how to use the union, and let me go and replace that to union, how to use the union set operator, and then maybe a couple of other ideas about other set operators that you can use in other versions of SQL.